Today, I want to talk about the horse you have to bet in this year's Preakness Stakes. But before I do that, I want to address a question I got after the Kentucky Derby relating to my video on Fierceness and the 3 reasons he wouldn't win the Kentucky Derby. One of those reasons was that I said he had poor ESRs. ESRs are early speed rations. That's my own measurement of energy disbursement. And therein lies the key. They are not speed figures. Because this guy wanted to know how he could have run so fast in the Florida Derby, yet not run fast early. And if you looked at the raw fractions, you might think he did run fast early, but he didn't expend a lot of energy. And that's incredibly important when you're looking at horse races. Horses will typically run their best when they are comfortable. In fact, there's this notion that when horses win by big margins, they could have gone even faster because they weren't pushed. It's just not true. If you look at most world records, most track records, most of the time, the horses won by daylight. I mean, how much faster do you think Secretariat could have gone in the Belmont? He was running easy. He was running within himself. That's what these speed rations measure. And so my concern with Fierceness is that he was going to have to run faster. He was going to have to expend more energy early. But let's start with the Preakness Stakes and with the new shooters. You hear this every year. We got to be careful about the new shooters. Now, Muth has been withdrawn from the Preakness Stakes. That was a horse that a lot of people like, trained by Bob Baffert. He's out, but we still have several new shooters in this Kentucky Derby. And just like I say, every year they are up against it. Take a look at this. Since 1960, a 0.4 impact value. That means, in essence, that they're winning about 40% of the races they should win. And this is just based on representation. It's not based on odds. And I won't go too deep into that. But still, a very low impact value. And look at that return. For every $2 bet, you get 79 cents back. So they're big losers overall. It gets worse when the horse was out of the money in its last race. Look at that, a 0.26 impact value and 61 cent return. And by the way, that includes National Treasure, who won last year after finishing 4th. I believe it was in the Santa Anita Derby, and then right to the Preakness Stakes, and it won. But it had a pace advantage in that race. That's another thing to look at. Well, first of all, let's start with Preakness favorites. Since 1873, a 49% win rate for Preakness favorites and a $2.22 return. So whoever the favorite is in the Preakness Stakes, you've got to look for those horses. And a big reason for that is because Kentucky Derby winners do incredibly well in the Preakness Stakes since 1932, and that's when the order of the Preakness Stakes was kind of set. It came after the Kentucky Derby. Before that, even in 1930, when Gallant Fox won the Triple Crown, the Preakness Stakes was before the Kentucky Derby. So this is after the order had been established. 80 Kentucky Derby winners went to the Preakness Stakes. 34 of them won. That's a 42.5% win rate and a $2.15 return for every $2 bet. When the horse was a long shot winner of the Kentucky Derby, in other words, unexpected, paying $20 or more, just a 20.8% win rate, but a $1.93 return. So not bad, actually better than favorites as a whole. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. We were talking about energy, and I heard a bunch of people say that the best horse in this year's Kentucky Derby were Sierra Leone and the Japanese horse. Let's put Forever Young, the Japanese horse, off to the side because I do think he ran a very, very good race. I'm going to argue with those who think Sierra Leone was the best because what we don't look at very often is the not so obvious things. And I will posit that it is much, much harder to race on a fast pace and win the Kentucky Derby as opposed to coming off the pace. All the stats show this. Horses that posted an ESR of 0 or greater in winning the Kentucky Derby, just 34.6% winners, a $1.63 net return for every $2 bet. Those are not bad figures. In fact, that's pretty much average for favorites. So it's not like they're bad horses, but take a look at those horses that recorded a negative ESR in Louisville. 54 of them went on to compete in the Preakness Stakes. 25 won, that's 46.3%, and a 240 mutual return. Mystic Dan posted a -8 ESR. Two Phils, I felt, ran a better race in the Kentucky Derby last year, but he didn't win. Mage won. But of course, Mage was not able to repeat in the Preakness Stakes because he didn't get the pace set up. And you see that so often in the Preakness Stakes. If there was a slow pace in the Kentucky Derby, there's probably going to be a faster pace in the Preakness. If there was a fast pace in the Kentucky Derby, there's probably going to be a slower pace in the Preakness. So you want to watch for those form reversals. Mystic Dan ran an incredibly good race and frankly had to kind of bull his way through on the rail. Now, these are the Brisnet Pass performances with my speed rations included. And let's go to some of, first of all, I do want to talk briefly about Uncle Heavy. I thought Uncle Heavy ran a deceptively good race in the Wood Memorial. This is a new shooter that I think could do well in the Preakness. Do I think he could win? Well, every horse has a chance of winning. I'm not betting on horses like this, though, because, again, historically, they are really up against it. Catching Freedom. Now, this is an interesting one. First of all, you'll notice that he did run a negative ESR in the Kentucky Derby. So that's a good sign, but he definitely benefited from the race dynamics. He was way off the pace and came charging late. The big problem with a horse like Mystic Dan is, does he regress? I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that is always an issue when it comes to the Preakness Stakes. By the way, another quick counter argument to those who think the Preakness Stakes is way too close to the Kentucky Derby. You wouldn't have those great rates for favorites. You wouldn't have those great rates for Derby winners if it was so taxing for these horses. I mean, you've got almost, 43% of horses that win the Kentucky Derby winning the Preakness Stakes when they compete. So keep that in mind. The other horse I do want to mention here is Imagination. Imagination looks like the sole speed in here, and I bring it up because it's a Bob Baffert trainee. And here is the typical, I don't know if you guys can see, I'm trying to highlight the comment there, but you'll notice it says in the comments that he rebid. This is so common for Baffert horses. So this is a horse to watch because this is your national treasure. But if you're betting historically, it's Mystic Dan in the Preakness Stakes. Obviously, odds matter. I talk about this all the time. But from a historical standpoint, if you get 2-1, 5-2, if you get the morning line odds on Mystic Dan, I think he's a no-brainer. That doesn't mean you can't hedge with some other horses, but you're looking at a horse that probably has realistically a 40 to 50% chance of winning this year's Preakness Stakes. That's definitely the way I would be looking at the Preakness Stakes this year. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a great Preakness day.